מה טובו לך יעקב משכנותיך ישראל מה טובו לך יעקב משכנותיך ישראל ואני ברוב חסדך אבוא ותך אשתחווה אליך אל קודשך ביראתך
It's September 17th, 1849. A hot spell has just snapped, and it's a clear, beautiful evening. The men pull down their window shades and close the doors of their shops. The sun is low on the horizon over the Sacramento River. There'll be a pretty sunset soon. It's a good night to usher in the Jewish New Year. The men walk toward the small front street home of a clothing merchant named Moses Hyman.
Hello, Lois. Hello, Joseph. New, how's business?
Good, Lois, good.
The rabbi leading the Rosh Hashanah service tonight will be the Reverend Mr. Wolf. These worshipers will go on to form one of the pioneer synagogues of the American West, Congregation B'nai Israel. The men heading for the Hyman house pass a multitude of canvas and wooden buildings that seem to have sprung up overnight. Gold was discovered in Coloma the previous year, and business between the miners and the merchants is brisk. Fortunes are about to be made, and in the years that follow, the world will rush into California. Most of the Jewish immigrants traveled from Poland and Germany. Others came from France, Russia, and England. Many braved their way around Cape Horn directly to San Francisco, a trip that cost $200 in steerage and took up to 6 months.
They came from Europe, they came to the East Coast, they learned the language, and they felt that they could do better by moving west. So some of them thought they might want to be prospectors and search for gold, as other prospectors did. But when they got here, they found that a lot of them found it was very difficult, and they thought they could do better by not only having their families with them, but by getting supplies to the miners.
Most of these Jewish settlers returned to the trades they had known in Europe. In the early 1850s, some 9,000 people lived in Sacramento. About 200 of them were Jews. Sacramento had become the leading city in the region. Development was sprawling out from Front Street. By this time, the Jewish community had organized into a congregation named the Children of Israel. A Methodist church, the first church building in Sacramento, was consecrated in 1849. This tin-roofed wooden chapel was shipped around the Horn from Baltimore to San Francisco, and then to Sacramento. The Methodists placed it at 7th and L Streets. The young Jewish congregation bought the church building in June 1852, and the new synagogue was consecrated in September. It was the first synagogue west of the Mississippi River to be owned by its members. Congregation B'nai Israel had a home of its own. Over the years, B'nai Israel occupied many buildings. The original synagogue burned in the Great Fire of November 1852. In 1904, the 6th Street building was sold, and the cornerstone was laid for the new 15th Street Temple. President Albert Elkis noted with pride that the new temple, to be built and furnished for $16,000, would be debt-free.
The old temple on 15th Street was a 2-story building in the corner of the alley. A sanctuary was upstairs, and downstairs they had a social hall and a very fine stage and a kitchen.
As Sacramento's Jewish population boomed after World War II, the 15th Street Temple, now occupied for 40 years, began to show its age.
Of course, we were fighting to keep the temple from falling down. The joke was that they kept it together with baling wire. Finally, Dalton said, let's build a new temple.
Dalton Feldstein, the president of B'nai Israel in 1947, was the guiding light of the new temple on Riverside Boulevard, the house that Dalton built.
The new temple was a vision of Dalton. There were a number of reasons for leaving the old temple, but there was no access for anyone with any handicaps. It was too small. But primarily it was because Dalton wanted a new temple.
Architect Bill Koblick, a member of the congregation, drew up the blueprints. Dalton Feldstein, Rabbi Hausman, Harry Kaufman, and Harry Tonkin collected $250,000 to start the groundbreaking.
In Hebrew, we snored. Milt Levinson and I went out every night after dinner. We'd go out snoring for 2 and 3 hours.
We had so many affairs, so many fundraising affairs, and so many people gave more money than they thought they could afford. But we finally built this temple, and we were all very proud of it because it was a new home for our Jewish family.
The sanctuary and the social hall owe a great deal, of course, to Dalton Feldstein and to Harry Lev and to Manny Schwartz. Manny gave all the drapery for the social hall, and Harry Lev gave all the beautiful wood that's in the sanctuary.
Dalton donated most of the bima, the ark, that whole wall, the reading table, the decorative gold stuff on the front, and the chairs.
The new temple was dedicated in 1954. In the early 1960s, the Buddy Candell Education Wing was added. By 1985, Temple B'nai Israel had been on Riverside Boulevard for more than 30 years. The congregation's membership had grown from 200 individuals to 700 families. It was time to modernize and expand. Past president and architect Al Dreyfus agreed to oversee the design and construction of the temple's renovation. In June 1986, groundbreaking ceremonies were held for the new chapel, library, and office building. The Harry M. Tonkin Memorial Chapel and the Sosnick Library were dedicated in November 1987. In the mid-90s, the social hall was modernized, and a major gift from the Len family was used toward renovating the temple's aging kitchen. The most recent building project, the Opera Courtyard, began in the summer of 1997. It was designed in a style reminiscent of Old Jerusalem. The courtyard is surrounded by a stone walkway engraved with the names of B'nai Israel families. The courtyard was dedicated in April 1998. In the early morning darkness of June 18, 1999, B'nai Israel suffered a cool and wrenching blow.
Flames of hate left a devastating scar on Temple B'nai Israel in Sacramento. A pre-dawn arson fire engulfed the temple's library.
In a heartening show of support, Gentile clergy, politicians, and a human tide of racially and spiritually diverse people came together to denounce this terrible crime. Rallies were held. Contributions poured in. Thousands of ordinary people shared our shock and our grief. We were not alone.
We gather because the synagogues of Sacramento were burned.
For our sisters and brothers whose lives have been shattered, may they be uplifted by this our acts of outpouring and love.
Send a loud and clear message to those who torched the 3 synagogues that their crime will find no haven, no sanction, no silent assent.
This is the first time that I've stood in this room. And it's hard to find the right words. And when I put my hand in this light, I see hope. Hope for a future where children will come and play, where we will learn, and we will study, and we will pray, and we will be a part of a greater whole of the Jewish people. Chazak v'yamatz, we will have courage and we will be strong, and we will prevail.
Ironically, I think that much more good will come out of the bombing than any harm that was inflicted on us. I think we're going to come across as a stronger congregation, a more involved congregation. I believe that the congregants have come into this with a very healthy attitude. They haven't come away feeling like victims at all. They've come away strengthened by the community support, and they've come away with a stronger commitment to Judaism.
Pray that everybody can return to God and everybody can
In its long history, B'nai Israel has suffered the ravages of fire several times. But the true temple doesn't reside in its buildings. It's in the soul and spirit of its members.
Over the past 150 years, B'nai Israel has adapted to the changing times and needs of its members. The journey hasn't always been smooth. The earliest controversy was over whether to follow German or Polish religious customs. When B'nai Israel adopted its first constitution in 1857, the congregation chose to worship in the German tradition.
There was a lot of dissension between the Polish Jews and the German Jews, and they were so at odds with each other that one group left.
The loss of B'nai Israel's building to fire in 1861 motivated the two groups to reunify. Rabbi Abram Simon remembered.
The loss sustained reaped a splendid gain, for the flames licked up much of the rancor and hatred. The sorrow brought in its train good fellowship, and in a short while, the two congregations united under the old familiar name, B'nai Israel.
For the next few decades, B'nai Israel's services continued to follow the Orthodox traditions. They were conducted on Saturday mornings.
The congregation enter and perform their devotions with their heads covered. The ceremony consists of the prayers in Hebrew, the reading of the law by the appointed reader, and others called up out of the congregation. The men are habited in the scarf with the memorial fringes.
In 1877, Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise came to Sacramento during a tour of the West to drum up support for the new American Reform movement. 2 years later, B'nai Israel began holding shorter services in English, using Wise's prayer book, the Minhag America. Only 3 men were called up to the Torah, instead of the 7 formerly required. B'nai Israel also dispensed with the shachet, or ritual slaughterer.
4 women ordered 4 lamb's tongues or calf's tongues for a certain Friday night Sabbath dinner, and it was known that only 1 kosher beef was killed, and the women didn't know how they got 4 kosher tongues from 1 beef, so they decided that the shochet was not on the up and up, and he was let go.
In 1880, B'nai Israel publicly proclaimed itself a congregation of Reformed Israelites.
Progress in religious matters they claimed to be as necessary and commendable as in political and social life. Hence, so far as the genius of their peculiar faith will allow, they seem resolved to keep up with the times and to conform to modern customs.
Reform Judaism provided the pathway for Jews to have it both ways, to be Jews and to be Americans.
But differences between Reform and Orthodox congregants continued. In the years before the turn of the century, membership numbers fluctuated as conflicts waxed and waned. But a series of outstanding lay leaders provided the guidance the congregation needed.
Even in those days, it was difficult to get a minyan, and so they had similar problems that they have today. There were also many discussions about whether or not they should wear hats, and they finally decided that the men could do as they liked. So when they had this discussion, the men who wore hats all sat on one side, and those who did not sat on the other side.
Throughout the 1890s, a group of highly observant Jews prayed together in the back of Jacob Bloomberg's hat store. In 1900, several Orthodox members of B'nai Israel joined them to form Hevra Toras Moshe, today's Mosaic Law congregation. In 1885, B'nai Israel formally joined the Reform movement. The pendulum continued to swing from very liberal to more traditional and back again. But in the first half of the 20th century, the atmosphere was distinctly Reform.
Our wedding was in the sanctuary at the temple in 1940, and we were going to have a Reform wedding, but we were going to be married under a chuppah. And the men were not going to wear hats. Well, my little Orthodox mother from Brooklyn was there, and she had a fit. So Frank had to go out and get a number of hats, otherwise she would have left the wedding.
The services were rather thin. They were the pale, standard Reform services of the pre-war decades. The old Union prayer book was still being used. There was a great deal of English, very little Hebrew. The hymns were from the Union hymnal, and they really had very little Jewish content in terms of melody and sentiment. They might have been very much like the hymns that were sung in the First Methodist Church.
Well, now Rabbi Hausman, he came from up north. And when our boy was going to be bar mitzvah, he had never done a bar mitzvah at all. They didn't do them, you know. Some of the Reform temples had just started to do bar mitzvahs, and he had never done one. This was his first bar mitzvah.
I think the most significant change in the temple is that it has become more traditional in its services and so on. In the era of Rabbi Hausman, no one wore a head covering at all. No one wore a tallis in temple. Now, if you come into service, you see that many, many men are wearing head coverings and even wearing tallises.
The overarching vision that I saw was to move the congregation in a way that people would accept and embrace the beauty of Jewish tradition and the idea of the mitzvot, the commandments of Judaism, and blending them together in a way that would fit in a Reform culture, a Reform Jewish culture.
A major crisis in B'nai Israel's history erupted in the early 1970s. It centered on Cantor Eli Cohen and eventually precipitated the Great Split.
There was a considerable period of time when the temple did not have a rabbi. We were looking for a rabbi, and the cantor really assumed the functions and duties of the rabbi. And he endeared himself to a great many people in the temple.
But allegations that Cantor Cohen had engaged in serious misconduct came to light. After 2 rancorous congregational meetings, the board decided not to retain him. A distressing split ensued.
At that time, about 40, maybe 50 at the most, of membership left to join Cantor Cone and his little group.
When he left, he took many of our very wonderful workers from the temple, and they formed another synagogue. We lost so many people that were very much involved in the temple, and it was a great sadness.
Membership dwindled to about 300 families. The congregation was left badly demoralized. After the trauma of the Great Split in the mid-1970s, B'nai Israel needed a healer, a man of great energy and vision who would be able to lead the congregation beyond the bitterness of the recent past and to look to a brighter future. It found such a man in Rabbi Lester Frazen.
Before I started full-time on the job, I had been told that the split had caused what Glotzer called the loss of nerve. So what we tried to do was to assure the people that the congregation was salvageable and rebuildable, and that we could become a viable institution again. It took a good 5 years before that really came to pass.
B'nai Israel has thrived under the leadership of 26 rabbis. B'nai Israel's rabbis have had an especially profound impact. The first was Rabbi Harold Reinhardt.
Harold Reinhardt was an austere individual, but extremely congenial.
My dad came in 1926, and then he brought Mother as a bride in 1928. He went to the Mosaic Law Synagogue, which was a small synagogue, supposedly Orthodox, though they had mixed seating even then. And then he came to the temple and was astonished. He heard for the first time a woman soloist singing with the choir, and he met Rabbi Reinhardt, who was a very brilliant and progressive and interesting man. So he affiliated with the temple.
When a special service was held in 1927 to commemorate B'nai Israel's 75th anniversary, Rabbi Reinhardt wrote a history of the congregation and composed a hymn to mark the occasion.
Zealous of the Spirit on our Jubilee, praise we with grateful hearts the pioneers, whose shining works like diamonds we see in splendor through these 75 years.
In 1948, Rabbi Irving Hausman was chosen to lead the temple during a time in which major changes took place.
When I came to this city 18 years ago, this was a very small town. And I felt almost like a pioneer, particularly in my own particular pulpit. It was small. There were very few people of the Jewish faith in the community, about a half of the population that we have now. But we worked hard, we actually labored, until we really established a fine Jewish community here in this city.
Rabbi Hausman was a dynamic figure with a compelling theatrical presence.
Before the Lord shall ye be pure.
He was more of an actor than a rabbi, and he used to give some terrific services.
We enjoyed Rabbi Hausman very much. He really could have been a
Shakespearean actor because his sermons were of that type. He would get very dramatic.
Rabbi Lester Frazen was officially installed as the temple's 25th spiritual leader in January 1974. He instituted many changes. The temple newsletter reported that, for the first time in many years, there will be single services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur Eves, and with no reserved seating. Again, a break with the recent past. Rabbi Frazen touched the lives of many members of the temple.
I can't say enough about the personal assistance given to me by Rabbi Frazen upon the death of my husband.
He also was very involved in life cycles such as happy events, the bar mitzvahs, the bat mitzvahs, the weddings, etc. He did them all with ease and perfection.
Rabbi Frazen served for 20 years, a record for the temple. In June of 1995, he led services at B'nai Israel for the last time. Rabbi Brad Bloom succeeded him. A professionally trained choir sang at B'nai Israel for the first time when the 6th Street building was consecrated in 1864.
2 years later, the congregation acquired an organ, an organist, and a musical director. And for many years, the music followed the German tradition.
And I walked in, and I heard an organ playing. And when I heard the organ playing, I turned around and walked out because I didn't think that was the temple that I would be going to.
Eventually, when I was president, at Rabbi Hausman's urging, we brought a cantor to our congregation, and this was our first cantor.
When Eli came in, he brought in more of the Hebraic type rather than German type music into the services. The music was very, very beautiful. Eli had a magnificent voice, and he formed a choir for Temple. At first, we did not do the high holiday services because we weren't all that great, to be honest with you, but it was a choir. And really, this was the beginning of the music, of making our own music in Temple.
In 1978, Carl Nalloway Jr. joined the staff as temple organist. He became Chazan in 1983.
Carl brought to our music a depth of emotion and feeling that is exquisite, and he is a superb cantor.
This is my family. There is no other way to describe it. I think that's why I've stayed as long as I have.
No matter what changes the future brings, it's clear that beautiful Jewish music is here to stay. In the 19th century, when B'nai Israel followed the Orthodox tradition, women were segregated from men during services.
The females take no part in the exercises, except the repetition of the prayers. They are hidden from view in the back seats, and by their silence and seclusion remind one of the veiled inmates in Mohammedan mosques.
But even in the early days, women played a large part in B'nai Israel and in the Sacramento community. Jessie Yashby later wrote about several of these women.
The first was Bertha Elkus. Bertha was very prominent in Sacramento life. She is considered the patron saint of Sacramento music. She was one of the founders of the Saturday Club and of the Sacramento Symphony. Bertha Elkus also founded our Sacramento Red Cross. The other woman that I wrote about was Sophie Price. The Price Fund of the temple is named for her mother. Sophie Price was outstanding as a teacher and educator, and she also brought woodworking and manual training into the Sacramento school.
In 1927, the Ladies Hebrew Benevolent Society, a group of civic-minded women from B'nai Israel, changed its name to Temple Sisterhood, the first group in the country to use that name.
I was president of Sisterhood during the war, and I had to give a report from to the president and the board once a month when they had their meetings. They would put me in the kitchen while they conducted their business. When it was my turn, somebody opened the kitchen door and let me into the board. And when my time was up, I was asked to leave. That was the first, that was about as much women's lib as we had in those days in our temple.
The women's role has changed greatly because now we have women on the board, and we've had several women presidents, and they are equal.
From the inception, women have been a huge part of the educational process here, part of the leadership, not just in Sisterhood, but also in the larger temple community as well. I think there's been an increase in this past year because I think more and more women are also reaching out for roles in liturgy in a way that they might not have before.
Sacramento's Jewish population reflected the growth pattern of the population as a whole. The first big wave of immigrants followed the discovery of gold. Over the next 100 years, Sacramento's Jews continued to flourish as the area steadily grew.
The second big influx of Jews came just after World War II. Former servicemen who had experienced and liked the casual California lifestyle returned to Sacramento, and B'nai Israel again experienced a surge of growth.
Some men arrived with families in tow. Others came alone. B'nai Israel welcomed all newcomers into its sheltering embrace. The synagogue served not only as a center for worship and Jewish education, it was also a place to make lifelong friends, find romance, and enjoy the warmth of an extended family.
The first Friday after we arrived, we went to temple. Our very dearest friends were very active in the temple, and it was really like a family life.
Every Friday night after the service, a gang of us used to go downtown to a coffee shop and sit there and schmooze and talk about the service.
Temple life was so integrated that the people loved to be with each other. Even after services, we went to each other's homes.
And a Sunday, you went to Del Paso Park, and in those days we didn't have too many cars, and so whoever had the car would have to make about 4 trips out there to make sure that everybody got out there. And everybody would bring their chickens and their sandwiches and everything else, and it was all picnic day, and the men would play pinochle, and the kids would run around the park. So
when I came here, I found a home for me. Everything I wanted, I found at the temple.
The congregation's third big growth spurt occurred in the 1970s and 80s, during the tenure of Rabbi Fraser. B'nai Israel grew from about 300 families to more than double that number. Today, Temple B'nai Israel is the largest synagogue in Sacramento, and it's still family.
That's the thing that makes a temple or any organization successful. It makes you feel wanted and warm.
B'nai Israel and its congregants have prospered during the past 150 years. Along the way, the synagogue and its members have given back to the community.
During the 19th century, B'nai Israel sent relief to disaster victims in Northern California and the persecuted Jews of Europe. During the two world wars, congregants demonstrated against anti-Semitism and adopted several war orphans. The next few decades brought interfaith outreach and an even stronger commitment to activism.
I came from a background of social action, so I began making a pitch at the temple for food for the teen clinic, and it became a standard. And I made the pitch only once a year at the high holiday time, and tried to bring about the guiltiest feeling in the members of the congregation that I possibly could. We have a woman who I've often called the saint of the congregation, a woman named Helen Merritt, who again is a deeply spiritual person.
She drives another 5 miles to the central downtown food closet, where she spends the rest of the day.
She became very much involved in a food closet downtown.
Ursula Stanton said to Betty Rubin, "Why doesn't our congregation do something about hunger in Sacramento?" And in 1982, February of 1982, we were in the food business.
Today, the congregation continues to be active in the community, participating in rallies, helping the less fortunate, working with AIDS patients, and building unity and understanding. B'nai Israel has known its serious moments, but congregants remember many festive occasions as well, including 3 celebrations of the temple's founding. In the late 1940s and 50s, there were many parties and dances, such as the Hanukkah balls organized by Phyllis Hausman.
The first year we took parachutes. And we hung parachutes from the ceiling and got a crystal ball which had mirrors in it and made the stardust around the room, and it really made the room look beautiful. And we were thrilled with that. The second year it was Stairway to the Stars, and we hung stars.
But one year she had a theme, and a Chinese theme, and she had a huge Buddha drawn. And of course Irving Hausman just went out of his skull when he saw the Buddha. The husbands were asked to do dance numbers, and I'm a very klutzy individual, but I remember being in the Bloomberg home, and Mary Jane had a chorus line of men, and of course you just imagine us, we didn't know where to kick, where to dance, and we stumbled all over each other, but the audience loved it.
In the 50s we all wore these petticoats, so we gave our husbands our petticoats to wear, and they managed with 2 pie tins, and they had little umbrellas that they twirled, and they had to repeat that dance about 5-6 times.
Shireen and Lester Frazen recalled some highlights of their years at B'nai Israel.
The most exciting event of that year was producing Fiddler on the Roof with the students of the religious school. Joel Hessing helped to direct it. Arlen Opper played Tevye, Debbie Weintraub played Golda, and of course my son played the rabbi. It was a wonderful 2-day production, and we raised $5,000.
We have fantastic voices in the congregation, and we put on a show every year. They even include me. They're kind enough to even include me. We put on a show every year of Broadway music written by Jewish composers.
When Rabbi Frazen retired, he was honored and even roasted.
The phone rings, and those wonderful dulcet tones emanate from the receiver. "Hello, Irwin." "This is Rabbi." I said, "I know who it is, Lester."
It was really very amateurish, because we all did our little shtick, whatever it was, and it was fun, and he loved it, and we made fun of him. It wasn't a real roast, but rather a mini roast.
Dorothy Kuba-Landsberg expressed what so many members of the congregation feel.
The temple has meant a great deal in my life. I went through Sunday school there. I was confirmed. And when I was confirmed, I think if they'd had a nunnery for Jewish women, I would have joined. I was felt so strongly about my religion, but I was married at home, but I was married by Rabbi Goldberg. Rabbi Goldberg named my first child. Rabbi Feinsilver named my second child. I have always felt it to be my temple.
Since 1849, 5 generations of B'nai Israel's children have grown up and had children of their own.
My Jewish education at B'nai Israel was not the way it is this time. Sometimes we played a farmer in the dell, sometimes we played Here Goes Around the Mulberry Bush. We learned about holidays, and we just had fun with all the plays and everything we did.
Especially after World War II, many members of B'nai Israel were inclined to assimilate, to not stand out. The quality of religious education for the congregation's children reflected that attitude.
I think we turned out a generation after generation of poorly educated youngsters in those days.
But today, there's a strong emphasis on teaching children what it means to be Jewish.
We send almost 90% of our confirmation class to Israel every year. And the results of that, and spending 5 weeks in Israel, is that they are galvanized. They are galvanized about their Judaism, about their sense of community with each other, and we are really going to reap the fruits of that when we see the kids continuing to study through their graduation of high school.
The people here are hungry for knowledge. The children are as hungry as their parents, and we've had a tremendous amount of support from the parent leadership in the religious school to help us bring about a stronger Jewish education that has much more depth than a generation ago had experienced.
I think this congregation has a great future, and I honor its history, and I honor those who have built this congregation and have given us the privilege of being here. And I'm looking forward to seeing in the future our congregation provide facilities where we can really teach the history of 150 years of B'nai Israel in Sacramento. And that is a heritage that I want every child to grow up knowing and feeling proud about as members of this congregation.
Shalom Aleinu
I believe that there is direct link between the significance of these evenings and what's going on in this world. Those events, in a different magnitude, in a different way, represent the stubborn insistence of the Jewish people wherever they live.
I can simply sum up the teaching with the prophet Micah's simple appeal. It had been told thee, O man, what is good, and what the Lord requires of thee, only to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God.
What is a synagogue? A synagogue is made up of three parts. The house of worship, which is our sanctuary. The house of study, which is our religious school, our very busy education, activities, and what is the house of assembly? Here you are, where we meet.
The temple to me has always been, like, as I say, the center of our family. It's my way of telling God I love Him, I love my religion, I love my faith, and how I do it is in music. That's my way of doing it. And the temple has given me that chance to do it that way. And that's one thing I'm extremely grateful to Temple of B'nai Israel for.
Sometimes, you know, it just a place like Sacramento may not think it's as important as it should. Just its impact is tremendously vital to ongoing Jewish experience, to each person who is in this community. You have a rich history, but the greatest chapter should surely be yet to write.
So far as I'm concerned, B'nai Israel has played a very important role in my life, in jumping in and getting deeply involved. This is my way of contributing to Judaism, to be involved in the temple. I feel it's very important for every person who is Jewish to do that. It keeps Judaism alive. It's a way of Yiddishkeit as well as the religious aspect of it. If we can only transmit that feeling to our children and our children's children, we will succeed in keeping Judaism alive.